Doran Kemper, the pizza creep. This is a story about the most disturbing thing that's ever happened to me while delivering pizzas in high school. There are a few others, but this one stands out above the rest. I was 16 years old and just got my license, so I needed a job to pay for a car. A few of my good friends were working at a local pizza place in town close to my house, so I decided to apply and got the job without having to interview, because they were so short-staffed. They also hired me as a delivery driver without ever checking to see if I even had a driver's license or not. I did, but always thought that was funny. About a month or two later, we were having a really busy night, and I was sent off to a delivery in a fairly nice part of town the next city over. This was before GPS was common and not very reliable, so we still used maps to locate houses. This particular house was in a new development, so it wasn't listed in any of our directories, but my boss thought he knew where it was and gave me directions. He was way off, so I had to call the house for directions, and this is where things got weird. The conversation on the phone was normal. I told the man I was near his house, but needed directions because the ones I was given weren't accurate. He was very understanding, and told me how to get there from the road I was on. A few minutes later, I pull into his driveway, and instantly get a bad feeling. He was a man in his early 50s and 60s, and was standing in the middle of his driveway with a creepy, satisfied smile on his face, and wearing a maroon silk bathrobe. I got out of my car and gave him my 10-inch Hawaiian pizza, which cost at $10.95 at the time. He gave me a $20 bill and told me to keep the change, considering I was late on the delivery and had to call the customer for directions. I wasn't expecting anything for a tip, let alone almost $10. I drove away from the delivery thinking that something was off, but I got a great tip, so I was happy. I lit a smoke and turned up my radio when I felt my phone vibrate. It was the number from the house I was just at. I got nervous thinking it was going to be a complaint or something, because why else would someone call the delivery guy after he has delivered your food? My blood curdled at the words that came out of his mouth. "Do you want to come back over and get the knife?" he said. Or at least that is what I heard. I said nothing and hung up the phone, and drove back to work as fast as I could. I also called one of my friends who was working there at the time and told him what had happened. On the 5 minutes ride back to work, he called me at least 3 or 4 more times. For some reason, I actually answered one of the calls, and he asked me if I wanted to come back after I get off work and spend the night. I was greeted at work by laughter from pretty much everyone working that night. Everyone thought I was either faking or overreacting. Then, I got another call on the phone from the same guy. I showed my manager while the phone was ringing and let it go to voicemail. That's when he decided to call the restaurant. Once this happened, my manager realized this was probably a serious situation and answered the phone pretending to be me. He had a very short conversation with the guy, and at the end, told him he is not allowed to do business with us anymore and we are blocking his number. When my boss hung up the phone, his face was pure white and looked like he could barely comprehend what had just happened. I asked what the guy had said, but my boss would not repeat the words that came out of his mouth. I was so paranoid that I had to stay with a friend that night instead of going home. Guess who called me a couple hours later? Yeah, he called. At least 10 times. For at least a week or two, I was living in fear of being kidnapped. I was always looking at the people or cars that were around me, being paranoid that I was being watched or I was being followed. It's possible that I was right, because I started getting phone calls again. This is when I decided it was time to call the cops and put an end to this. I explained everything to the officer, and he assured me that he would take care of the situation. Turns out the cop did nothing. I live in a low-crime town of less than 20,000 people. This guy didn't have anything else to do that day except write some speeding tickets during the afternoon, and then some DWIs in the evening. The calls kept coming, and my paranoia grew. This needed to stop, so I told my boss that things hadn't improved, and he called the cops himself. An officer came down to the restaurant and took down our statements. Unlike the other officer, this man seemed visibly shaken and angered by the events that had happened. He promised that he would personally handle the situation, and I didn't have to worry anymore. This police officer followed up on what was said and never heard from that creep again. I kept that same job for about 3 years and nothing but great times there. However, creepy silk bathrobe fuckface, go fuck yourself and let's not meet again, alright? The library and the giant insects. My mother worked at a small library when I was in high school. I had a project due, so one day headed over there to get some work done. I had the reference room to myself, sat down, and started working. After about a half hour of having the room to myself, a man came in to use the copy machine. He was there for almost 30 minutes, just making copies of whatever he pulled out of the notebook he was carrying. At one point, I looked up and he was leaning against the machine, arms crossed across his chest, just scowling at me. I looked back down at my work, wondering what the hell his problem was. After about making 100 copies probably, he packed the stuff up and left. At this point, I took a break and wandered up to where my mother was working at the front desk. "What's the deal with the guy in the copies?" I asked her. She actually looked shocked for a moment and said, "Oh, I didn't realize he was there. Is he still there?" I said no. She said, "Good. If you ever see him again, don't say anything to him." Like I was going to, but whatever. Of course, by now, my curiosity was piqued. I had heard him crumple up several pieces of paper, so I went back into the reference room and headed for the garbage can parked next to the copy machines. I dug up a few of the balled up papers out of the garbage. They were pictures, drawings of women. Women jogging. Women doing calisthenics. Women riding bikes. Women at the beach. Only, the bodies were human. Each woman's head had been replaced by the head of a giant insect. I think about that day sometimes. It still makes my blood run cold. I made a new account for this, because even now, 20 years later, I don't want people around me to know. Before I tell my story, let me set the scene. It was the summer of 1996, and I was 15 years old. I grew up in a good neighborhood, in a typical Swedish university town with my dad. I was a pretty well-behaved kid, did good in school, didn't smoke or drink. In fact, I didn't want to go to parties. I didn't have a boyfriend, but I did have a crush on a boy at school, and I felt pretty sure he was curious about me too. But we were both shy people. This took place in the end of August, when the light summer nights started to slowly grow darker and the days shorter. It was a very hot summer though, and all the popular girls would wear white tight tops to show off a flat tummy, and one day, I had bought one for myself, just to try and see what it was to be a normal teenage girl. I still had those silly shoes too, the Spice Girls inspired ones that sprained many ankles during that era. Afterwards, I wondered if the outfit is what started it all. Suddenly, I started to get notes. They were placed in the basket of my bicycle. Notes with messages such as, "Like your style, baby," and "Growing into a woman before my eyes." I didn't tell anyone. I strongly suspected the idiot gang at school. 2 of them lived close to me, and I thought they were teasing me for changing my style, teenage logic. We've all been there, right? To show them that I didn't care, I wore my new style all the damn time. One morning, I noticed that someone had stepped on the flowers in the flower beds under several of our windows, and I told my dad about it. He worried it was someone checking the place out, planning a break-in, and asked me to turn on alarm whenever I was alone. Things had gone missing before. Insignificant things, but still, you never know. My dad owned a rather small business, and his idea to celebrate the 10-year anniversary mark, he wanted to treat his employees to a weekend away, and had booked a place up north in Corunna. I was used to being left home alone at night. Sometimes his work demanded that he traveled for a week or so, and it wasn't a problem. Again, I was a good kid. And anyways, only a few houses down the street lived a couple that we knew, and they usually checked in on me if I was alone for many days. They had no kids of their own, and would often help out with everyone else's. It was on the Saturday that it happened. I had arrived home very late on my bicycle after having watched Cutthroat Island at a friend's place. I walked in the front door and noticed a draft. Had I forgotten to close the window before I left? Then I noticed that the alarm was turned off. Had I forgotten that too? I walked through the house to the living room, when suddenly Mr. W, the man from down the street, stood in front of me. "Hi there, kiddo. Did I scare you? I just came to check in on you." I found this strange, since it was past 1 at night, and he smelled of alcohol. I'm fine. I'm off to bed now," I said, and got the strangest feeling. Despite it being a hot summer night, I was shaking with cold. Something inside of me told me that this was an extremely dangerous situation. Something about him was off, as if he was wearing a mask and not himself, as if there was someone else behind his eyes, Not the friendly Mr. W I had known my entire life, not the one that had watched me grown up, not the one I joked and smiled and talked to on a daily basis, not that one, but something else. Something sinister. Then it got worse. "Wine?" he said, and nodded in the direction of a wine bottle. I shook my head. No. I don't drink. My dad, I said, and tried to sound normal, but my voice didn't feel like my own. "Oh, you're almost a grown woman now. You can do as you wish," he continued, pouring wine into an unwashed glass. "I've been watching you. You've really grown." And then it went worse. He kept telling me how beautiful I had become, and how he had noticed my new clothes. And I surely knew that it was an open invitation to men. "I'm a nice person, don't you think?" he said. "I'll be good to you. You can trust me. I'll be real gentle." I start to back towards the front door, but he stops me by grabbing hold of my upper arm and then pulling me hard towards him. "Don't be like that. No one likes a tease," he says. And at that moment, when I try to break free, he laughs and goes, "Wanna play, huh? I can play," and starts to shake me. I feel how much stronger he is than I was at the moment, and I realize I have to make him let go long enough for me to run out of this house, run down the street, run somewhere where I can call for help. At this point, it is as if someone else hijacked my brain, and I started saying and doing things that I wasn't even aware of until afterwards this whole situation. "Yeah, I like to play," I hear myself say, and he smiles and starts to touch my hair. He dragged me off to the bedroom, and I tried to pretend to be into it. I had never had sex before or even truly wanted to have sex, and I had no idea how to fake it either, but I tried. The moment he tossed me down on the bed, I said, "You must go lock the front door and turn on the alarm," as I tried to look eager and not scared out of my freaking mind. "Okay," he said. "Don't move." I was on my feet faster than I thought possible, and locked the bedroom door from the inside. My plan had, however, not turned out as I had hoped. He had taken me to my dad's bedroom, not my bedroom. My bedroom had a window that let out on the roof of the garage, and from there I could have jumped. But this room had no escape, but it had a phone. My brain had forgotten the number to the police, and the only number I remembered was my dad's work phone. He answered almost right away. My dad phoned the cops from his other phone, and I still had him on the line while Mr. W tried to open the door with a screwdriver, shouting at me and promising to "gut me like a fish" when he got in. My dad also phoned another neighbor, Mr. K, who used to be in the military, and often bragged about how he would treat any burglar for a trip to jail or something like that, or to the emergency room if given the chance. So of course he called Mr. K. Mr. K arrived before the police, and he didn't break his promise. But the sound of the fighting outside the room was terrible, and I had no idea who was winning, and who was on the winning side. Mr. K was an old guy but fit. But what if Mr. W had a weapon? I mean, he already had a friggin' screwdriver in his hand, and that thing's are pretty sharp. I don't think I dared to breathe until Mr. K asked me if I was okay. And I didn't dare get out of that room before the police had arrived. And even then, I was almost unable to move. This whole experience was as if my mind had escaped my body. A man who I had known since toddlerhood had suddenly started to stalk me and planned to use the fact that my dad was out of town to rape me and God knows what else. I had trusted him. I trusted him. And I had been so wrong. After so many years, I still have trust issues today. I spoke to his wife once, long after the incident. She had filed for divorce and told me that's the reason she refused to have children with him. It was that deep down, she feared that they would not have been safe in their home. So, Mr. W is dead now, and I'm glad. We will never meet again.